This video is brought to you by Raycon.
I trust you.
Hollow Knight Silksong is finally out. It's been well over a month now, yet it still feels so weird just saying those words. And naturally, it's been taking the internet by storm. Opinions are kind of all over the place, but there is no denying that the game is somehow even bigger than the original, much more refined, and soul-achingly gorgeous to look upon. There are many who consider it a towering achievement, and one of the finest games to hit the scene in years. However, today I'm not here to talk about the merits or failings of the game itself. To me, the most interesting thing about Hollow Knight Silksong is how this weird little indie game about bugs has dramatically disrupted the entire industry. Wherever you stand on Hollow Knight Silksong, you simply cannot deny that it's got everyone talking. And talking and talking and talking and talking. I mean, look at me. I'm talking right now. It's crazy. First, of course, we've got to talk about the hype leading up to release. This has already been written into the history books as one of the longest and most intense development and hype cycles ever. Plenty of games take their sweet, sweet time coming out, and we go through this whole process of, oh, has the game been canceled? Why is it just year after year is going by and we don't hear anything? But this has certainly been one of the most notable cases in years. And at first, I kept thinking that this was probably a case of a pretty small, but just very dedicated and vocal audience, just a very passionate one. But then I would be reminded just how incredibly well the original game sold. It's like, no, this actually was a very, very big crowd of people. And every single time there was the barest hint, even the smallest little whiff of a potential of a possible update coming, it would be a huge thing. It would be a big news story every single time. Every gaming event or presentation where there was even the barest chance that Silksong could potentially be re-revealed, the chat was just flooded with people talking about it. Even when nothing was going on, it constantly made the news. It became one of the biggest memes in gaming. They would make jokes about it at major presentations. Deadpool himself joked about Silksong in his own trailer. I think that's a decently big deal. And that whole hype process that we all witnessed and or experienced ourselves, that was big enough, and yet I wouldn't even consider that one of the most major points of disruption. The real disruption came when the game was finally, re-revealed for the final time, given a release date, and then released. Really, I would say that there are three primary ways that Hollow Knight Silksong disrupted the industry. The first was when it finally did get that date. When the day finally came. And when we got that date, it was only 2 weeks away. It wasn't a shadow drop, as a lot of people suspected it might be, but it was pretty darn close to it. Now, here's the thing about games. Indie games, more than anything, it is only harder and harder all the time to get your game seen by a potential audience, to get a significant number of eyes on it. More and more games are released every year. It is a just increasingly competitive market, and absolutely nothing is more important than day one, because you're going to get the biggest influx of people buying the game that's going to lift it up in the rankings. Storefronts are going to be more likely to feature a game that has just come out. When your game launches, you have got to get that snowball rolling immediately. Momentum is absolutely key. And if it's hard enough to launch an indie game on the most ideal day possible and have it see even a modicum of success, launching next to a game like Silksong was basically seen as a death sentence. On that day, or even within that week, or even multiple weeks, most of the audience is going to be playing and seeing and talking about Silksong. And 2 weeks was just not enough time for all of the other indie devs and publishers to readjust their plans. There were plenty of games that did delay their releases, But that wasn't an option for everyone. At PAX, I actually spoke with someone who was promoting a game that was launching around that time, and it was simply not in the cards for them to delay the game. They just couldn't. They had made all these plans and all of these promises, and I don't know all of the finer details, but basically it just was not an option. They had to just put the game out knowing that it was going to be DOA. Overall, I do applaud Team Cherry for doing their own thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but this is one area where I think they probably could have done better. The fans waited so long for the game that it was nice not to make them wait too much longer after the release date dropped. But it was kind of unfair for the other devs. I can imagine that putting years of work into a game and knowing that you were just gonna release it and it was just gonna die, it's gotta be just heartbreaking. But that was just the nature of Silksong. That was just how crazy the internet was going for it, how all-encompassing it was. So yeah, the release timing was quite disruptive, but then another kind of smaller disruption, not one of the major ones. Team Cherry didn't send out a bunch of early copies to journalists and news publications, as would normally be the case because they felt that that wouldn't be fair to the Kickstarter backers who backed the games all of those years ago. They wanted everyone to have equal access to it at the same time. I think that was very thoughtful of them, but then you had a bunch of journalists coming and being like, this is really inconvenient for us because now we're all scrambling to play the game and get out a review in good time. And I can definitely see where they're coming from, but there's already kind of this like growing animosity toward journalists and reviewers within the gaming sphere, kind of a growing disconnect between the average gamers who just, buy and play and enjoy games and the people who play games and talk about them for a living. And so this spawned a whole conversation in itself about that disconnect and about journalist privilege and all that. So yet another can of worms on top of all of the other ones. Before we continue, a quick reminder that this video was brought to you by Raycon. Did you know that it's Raycon's anniversary? Well, what better way to celebrate this monumental occasion than with a pair of their fan favorite Everyday Earbuds Classic. Here you've got the classic look and feel and buttons of the original Everydays and all the features you know and love. Up to 32 hours of battery life using the charging case, multi-point connectivity, multiple sound profiles for different listening needs, the ability to easily take calls. But now they've also got active noise cancellation, and quick charging nets you 90 minutes of playtime with only 10 minutes of charging. This is easily my favorite model of Raycons yet. They still fit super comfortably in my ears. I can pretty much wear them all day. I've been doing a lot of house cleaning recently, which is not something that I enjoy generally, but my Raycons make it infinitely more tolerable. To try out a pair of the Everyday Earbuds Classic for yourself, head to buyraycon.com/Arlo or hit the link in the description or scan this handy QR code to get 20% off. All orders come with a 30-day happiness guarantee, so you got nothing to lose. Happy Rayconiversary to you all. Please enjoy the rest of the video. But let's get back to the major disruptions. The second one was the game's price. The first game offered a humongous value, just such a massive world, so many hours of gameplay for $15, frequently on sale. I bought it for 10. I felt like I was ripping them off. But Silksong, after all of these years, all of this hype with a greater economic situation, yada yada, inflation, the prices of games and products going up everywhere, they sell it for only $5 more? 20 bucks? 20 bucks. I still can't believe it. No, they could have sold Silksong for 30 easily. Easily. And they still would have sold millions of copies. They would have made so much money. And if they wanted to put the game on sale later, they totally could have done that. They didn't need to start so low. No, 30? No, absolutely. I think everyone would have expected 30. I could even see a scenario, just considering how the original game was already so big, offered so many hours. This game is only bigger, only offers more hours. 40 wouldn't even be out of the question. But 20? No, I think this right here was easily the biggest way that Silksong disrupted the industry. especially considering how prices everywhere are just going up and up and up. The Switch 2 just launched, and all anyone can talk about is how expensive it is and how expensive all of the games are. Everything in gaming is just getting so expensive. And here comes this massively hyped game for 20 bucks. It's a bargain bin price. You could consider this a statement, them taking a stand against these huge publishers and their $70 and $80 games. But then on top of that, even in the indie world, a lot of people claimed that this set an unfair standard that other developers and publishers simply could not meet. A lot of indie devs who already felt that their games couldn't compete with Silksong felt that their games also couldn't compete price-wise. They simply could not price their games that low, or else they wouldn't even make back enough of their costs. And they felt that this created an unrealistic expectation in the audience, that this would throw off the whole idea of how much a person should be expected to pay for however much game experience. And as with everything here, I can kind of see both sides. I can see where people are coming from, but I don't know how controversial this opinion might be, but I think I side a little bit more with Team Cherry here. I'm not a game developer. I've never sold any kind of product really, but I've always believed in the idea of competitive pricing. I believe in the idea of selling a product at a lower price to move more units, because then I feel like that has a knock-on effect, then it gets exposed to more people, that creates more word of mouth and more organic growth. There is this idea that you need to properly value the work that you do, in the artistic world. I do understand that, but you also have to balance that with the reality of how much you can expect to actually sell at any given price point. If you spend a certain amount of time and money on a game, or really any piece of art or any product, you can argue that you probably should value it at a certain level. But if people aren't willing to pay that price, then you were wrong. Industry is not fair. The art market is not fair. Quote unquote fair is not a real thing. In a perfect world, everyone is paid the exact right amount for what they do, but at the end of the day, the results are really what matter most. Team Cherry is in a unique scenario where their team is so small. Their budget absolutely microscopic, so they can afford to sell their game for a really low price. Even other indie games with teams that you could consider very, very small are still several times bigger than the size of Team Cherry. So if you're able to create your game for a very small investment and you know that you're going to sell a lot of copies and make a lot of profit anyway, why would you not take that opportunity? Especially with the hobby getting so expensive, this is kind of like a service to the gamers. It's kind of a public service, a really massive and amazing and beautiful, but really affordable game. It's basically unheard of in this economy. Smaller devs and publishers don't like it, and again, I can see where they're coming from. I absolutely empathize. But as far as the audience goes, everybody benefits. Literally everybody benefits. Team Cherry could have been more greedy. I mean, you wouldn't even call it greedy. They could have gotten a lot more money out of their audience, but they didn't want to. And it's hard to paint them as bad guys for doing that. You might argue that they're in a place of privilege and it was only possible for them to price so low because the first game sold so well, they had enough money to last for the rest of their lives. But that first game also offered a tremendous value. Even before they had made a dime, they already wanted to make that kind of decision and price their game that way. So I don't know, I can see the frustration. Maybe in some way this sets some sort of standard, but at the same time, I don't actually know if that's really true. I don't think one game is gonna change the entire standard. And honestly, I might do the same thing as them if I could. Again, pricing lower to potentially sell more copies, which in the long run is a good thing for everyone. So that's already two major ways that Hollow Knight Silksong disrupted the industry, and a couple of more minor ways to boot. We already think the entire situation is just absolutely crazy, it's completely dominating every conversation, and then what happens? The game comes out and it's hard. It's really, really hard. And every time we get a new game that's like really hard but really popular, it dredges up the whole conversation about difficulty in games. This conversation, it comes up over and over and over again because it's one of those things where there is no one single answer and you get people on both sides of the fence and they both have valid arguments. It's true that high difficulty with no difficulty options makes a game less accessible, less approachable, it limits the potential audience. Not everyone wants a hard game, but they might like everything else about the game, so like, yeah, I suppose that is a little bit unfair. A difficulty option will not ruin a game. That is not a wrong idea. But I do believe that it's also true that giving the option to change the difficulty changes what a game achieves artistically. An easy mode would not have ruined Dark Souls as a game, but I do think there's a really good chance that it would have made it a totally different game, and it probably would not have been as popular. I really do think that absolutely necessary difficulty was necessary to the game's success. I know that I wouldn't have played the game on the hardest difficulty if I had an option, and yet my heart tells me that I would not have enjoyed the game the same way. It would not have affected me the way that it did. When there is only one difficulty option, you have to meet the game where it is. Playing a game doesn't just have to be about seeing all of the environments and the bosses and reading all of the dialogue and everything. Difficulty itself can be an artistic choice, a part of the experience that is integral. So yeah, this conversation, it comes up again and again. It's never gonna die completely. It's always gonna be a thing. And Silksong churned it all up all over again. And it's already a big enough deal. It's already a big enough conversation when a game like Elden Ring does it, you know, this massive game that's really popular, but also really hard, but an indie game, that's huge. And ultimately, that's what's so fascinating here. So much disruption across the whole industry from an indie game. No, but not just an indie game. A tiny indie game. A game made by a downright microscopic team. 3 main developers. 3, with a handful of collaborators, but most of the credits are for like the score and like additional art and sound design and stuff. That a team that small can make a game that big and gorgeous and finely tuned and just good is, I mean, it's an incredible artistic feat. But that they also have the freedom to do everything exactly the way they want to do it every step of the way is laudable. Again, I'm not saying that Team Cherry is perfect. I do think at least a little bit more transparency during development would have really helped a lot. And the release timing thing, that really did mess up a lot of people's plans. But I really admire how fiercely independent they've been throughout all of this. They could have priced the original Hollow Knight higher. They didn't want to. They could have used the money from Hollow Knight and grown the team. They didn't want to. They could have caved to the ever-mounting pressure and rushed out a sequel. Everyone was just chomping at the bit to play it, but they took exactly as long as they wanted to. They could have charged more for it. They didn't want to. They could have made the game easier or built in some difficulty options to make it more approachable, to potentially reach an even wider audience and make even more money. But they didn't want to. They made the precise game that they wanted to make. They released it precisely when they wanted to, and they charged precisely what they wanted to charge. And this teeny tiny little massive indie game sent waves through the industry that are still being felt. And for a bonus disruption, I consider it disruptive every time an indie game gets really huge in this world of increasingly bloated AAA budgets. All these massive trend-chasing games fighting for any kind of attention. Maybe I'm looking too deeply into this, maybe they don't really care, but I feel like every Silksong or Balatro or Vampire Survivors or Undertale or whatever is a big reminder to these huge publishers that they have got all the power, but they don't actually know what they are doing creatively. They don't actually know how to make fresh, interesting games that reach big audiences. They throw all of this stuff at every wall they possibly can, and they are so lucky when something sticks. Hollow Knight Silksong, big AAA publishers would give anything to be able to harness and understand that kind of hype and success. But they're too stuck in their ways and too blinded by greed to do anything differently. Every year we see these massive games that flop horribly. Games made by hundreds and hundreds, even over 1,000 people that lose millions of dollars, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. These gargantuan, internationally developed products vastly outperformed by a little bug with a needle. Again, perhaps it's wishful thinking, but I can't help but imagine some filthy rich executive looking out the window of their high-rise office, peering out across the city and brooding about Silksong. Ooh, that Silksong. Just clenching their fists and wishing they could harness that kind of success. Well, thank you for watching, and, oh, what's that? After all this talking, you do want to know what I think of the actual game itself? You think I actually play video games? I'm way too busy talking about them. You should know this by now.